Welcome back to Encouraging Things. Today we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of Final Faction parts, along with some random kit that I had lying around, and we're going to bash them together in order to make a robot chicken. Now, the first thing we're going to start with is the legs, which I had to cut apart and glue together. Luckily these pieces fit really well together, so all I had to do was drill a couple holes, and then glue and insert. And now we have a couple of chicken legs. For the body, I wanted to use this capsule, which came out of one of those coin machines. I don't know what was originally in it, but it'll serve our purposes very well. Rather than drilling extra holes in the capsule for the legs, I found that the backpack that came with the Final Faction parts fit perfectly. All I had to do was cut it in half, so I could have hip joints on either side of the capsule. In a recent video by Dan Does, he used some JunkBot parts in order to make a build. Ironically, I had actually recently just bought my first box of JunkBots. Even though Dan says that in the UK they're no longer available, in the US they are actually available everywhere. So if you'd like to pick up some JunkBot parts, if you're thinking that you won't be able to, you actually can, as long as you're within the United States or willing to order them online or have someone send them to you. For my purposes, this random box of junk allowed for one part that I'd like to use, and that's this one right here. However, I'm not going to be using it as a claw, but rather as a beak. Now our robot's starting to look more like a chicken. But whenever you see a picture of a chicken running, or at least a cartoon of a chicken running, it always has its wings extended. So I'm going to add some Final Faction wings to the side in order to give it more of a body, and to give it that flow feeling as if it's running forward at all times. In order to complete the look, we do need to add the comb, which in this case will be the back of a toy Stegosaurus that we used in a previous build. Now the last thing we're going to need is a tail, and for that we're going to be using floral wire that I found at the Dollar Tree. However, the floral wire itself is not going to be enough, so we're also going to add some beads in order to give it body. And here's the completed tail. The design's supposed to look like it has multiple joints as if it's a robotic tail. And as you can see, I added some extra features to the end of each tail in the form of tools and weapons for our robot chicken to use. For the eye, I was originally going to go with a googly eye in the middle or two on the sides, but that looked a little bit too cartoonish and didn't really fit with the vibe, so I dropped that idea. Instead, I decided to make a bar that looked very similar to where the two halves of the capsule came together, but extended outwards. Originally, I was going to use some SPF foam that I got from the Dollar Tree. However, instead, I did find this cap to a VGA cable connector, which I sanded down, and it looks like it'll make a pretty good pair of goggles. Now, due to the way that I had the legs designed and the fact that I wanted the chicken to be in a running stance, I wanted to make a very simple base, which I used a small piece of wood from the Dollar Tree and then a cut off piece of plastic. It didn't want to stick initially, so I did have to drill another hole in the egg and then insert a rod in order to hold everything together, but once that was done, it was pretty stable. So during this build, I did want to highlight the way I've been painting my models. I have not been using my airbrush too much because it's a little bit awkward and difficult and I don't want to spill paint on my carpet. So I've been hand painting everything, and in order to do that, rather than using acrylic with water, I've been using acrylic with paint thinner, or airbrush thinner. Oddly enough, it works really well in the fact that I'm able to paint and then it dries off and then it looks really smooth, much the same way as water would. I don't know if it's better, but it seems to work really well for me. even though it is not recommended that new people paint in this way. But I figure if I'm going to get better painting one way or the other, I might as well do it the way I like, rather than having to switch later on once I've gotten good one way, and then want to do it a different way. The most tedious part of painting this model was of course the tentacles. Although most of the tentacles are white, I wanted the joints to be yellow color, very similar to the beak and to the claws. And so I had to hand paint each one individually. Another technique I wanted to discuss was edge highlighting, mostly for scratches and dents. I find that when I watch other people do it, they use a silver paint along the edge and it seems to come out okay. However, whether it's my technique or my paint, when I perform the action, it tends to come out looking like I've just painted silver over the top of another color. So for my highlighting and my scratches, I like to use silver rub and buff on a cheap dollar store brush, and then I'll dry brush for a quick cover paint to show an area where the paint has rubbed off completely. And then I'll use a stippling or a tacking technique on other areas in order to show more scratches. And to me it gives it a more natural look, and it's less like I'm trying to be random, and actually like the randomness does come into the model automatically this way. For weathering, I just went with a black ink wash. My India ink had dried out while it was sitting in its container, but I was able to just add a little bit more isopropyl alcohol and was able to get some more out of it, so it's nice that it's reusable like that. This container is a silicone container, which is how it's able not to stick so much to the edges, and I chose it specifically for that reason. Unfortunately, as you can see, I did go a little overboard with the ink and I didn't have enough alcohol in it, so it got very dark very quickly. However, I was able to thin it out and to get some of it away by taking a brush that was just covered in alcohol and very gently rubbing it over the spots that were too dark. The model in those areas did come out looking a little bit darker and dirtier than I wanted, but at least it didn't look like I tried to repaint it black. After everything was done, there were a few spots near the beak that were worn down, where paint had started to peel up because of all the times I had tried to weather it and then fix it and weather it and fix it. And so because of that, I just painted over it again with some thicker white paint. And I felt that it matched the model pretty well, simply because if this were a working robot, it would take damage, and anyone who owned it would want to repaint it and make it look better. So by just repainting rather sloppily in these areas, it actually gave the model a little bit more history, while also covering up my previous mistakes. So how did it turn out? exactly like I wanted it to. Every piece and every part came together exactly the way I wanted. The paint job is basically what I thought it would be. This is one of the few builds where I had a complete image in my head, and I was able to put it together in one fell swoop, as it were. So once again, I would like to thank you all very much for joining me, and I encourage each and every one of you to go out, find some parts, find some pieces, and whether you have a complete idea in your mind or just an inkling in the back, put some things together, try some stuff out, practice whatever you can, and make whatever you want. And who knows, maybe you too can build something as wild as a Cluckthulhu.